In 2019, a group of 4 American backpackers vanished in the Peruvian Amazon for 11 days. When search and rescue finally located them, only 2 were still alive. One refused to speak for 8 months. The other told investigators a story so disturbing that local police sealed the report and advised the families never to request the full transcripts. What they encountered in the jungle that week wasn't an animal. It wasn't a tribe. It was something that the indigenous Ashaninka people had been warning outsiders about for over 300 years, and the warning was always the same. Do not enter the clearing where the trees do not grow. The ground there is not ground, it breathes. Marcus Whitmore was 26 years old when he made the decision that would change his life forever. He had graduated from Ohio State University with a degree in environmental science, and like many young men his age, he believed that adventure was something you chased, not something that chased you. It was late July when Marcus, along with his younger brother Daniel and 2 friends from college, a woman named Reina Orozco and her boyfriend Victor Salinas, landed in Lima, Peru. They had been planning this trip for nearly a year. The goal was simple: to spend 3 weeks hiking through sections of the Peruvian Amazon, documenting wildlife, camping off-grid, and experiencing the kind of raw, untouched nature that most people only see in documentaries. None of them had ever been to South America before. None of them spoke fluent Spanish, and none of them believed in local superstitions. That was their first mistake. The group hired a local guide named Eduardo, a 43-year-old man who had spent his entire life near the jungle's edge. Eduardo was quiet, serious, and had a way of looking at the trees as if he expected them to move. During the first 2 days of hiking, he kept the group on well-marked trails. He showed them how to identify venomous snakes by the shape of their heads. He taught them which insects carried parasites. He was an excellent guide, calm, knowledgeable, and experienced. But on the 3rd night, Marcus made a request that changed everything. He had seen something on a satellite map during the trip's planning phase, a large circular clearing deep in the jungle, approximately 15 kilometers from any known trail. It was perfectly round, with no visible vegetation inside. Marcus assumed it was either a dried lake bed or perhaps a deforested patch from illegal logging. He asked Eduardo to take them there. Eduardo's face changed immediately. "No," he said, "that place is not for walking." Marcus laughed, assuming it was a joke, but Eduardo didn't smile. "The Ashaninka call it the mouth," Eduardo continued, his voice low. "They say the ground opens there. It breathes. It does not like visitors. People who go there do not return the same. Some do not return at all." Reina, ever the skeptic, rolled her eyes and muttered something about primitive superstitions. Victor snickered. Daniel looked uncomfortable but said nothing. Marcus, however, was fascinated. He pressed further. Eduardo refused again. That night, Marcus offered Eduardo an additional $500 to lead them to the clearing. Eduardo declined. He said he would rather lose his money than lose his mind. By morning, Eduardo was gone. He had packed his things in the night and hiked back toward the village without a word. The group woke up alone. They should have followed him. They should have turned back. Instead, Marcus pulled up his GPS, studied the terrain, and made the decision to continue without a guide. The jungle, which had felt magical during the first 2 days, began to feel different almost immediately. The sounds changed. The birds that had been singing constantly were now silent. The insects that had buzzed around their heads every minute were nowhere to be seen. Even the air felt heavier, thicker, as if the atmosphere itself was resisting their movement. By the 5th day, they reached the edge of the clearing. It was exactly as it appeared on the satellite image, a near-perfect circle of bare earth, roughly 200 meters in diameter, surrounded on all sides by dense jungle. No trees grew inside the circle, no grass, no moss, just dark, reddish-brown dirt that looked almost like dried clay. The contrast was jarring. Outside the clearing, the jungle was explosively alive, green, loud, crawling with creatures. But inside the circle,
Nothing moved, nothing lived. "This is it?" Victor said, sounding disappointed. But Daniel didn't respond. He was staring at the ground with wide eyes, his face pale. "Do you feel that?" Daniel whispered. Marcus stepped forward, his boots crunching softly on the strange soil, and then he felt it too.
The ground beneath him was moving, not shifting, not settling, breathing. He could feel it rising and falling beneath his feet in a slow, rhythmic pattern, like standing on the chest of some massive, sleeping creature. The sensation was so subtle, so quiet, that at first he convinced himself it was his imagination. But when he looked at the others, he saw the same horrified recognition in their eyes. The ground was alive. Reina was the first to suggest they leave. Her voice was shaking, and her usual skepticism had completely evaporated. She grabbed Victor's arm and started pulling him back toward the tree line. But before they could take more than 3 steps, something happened that none of them could explain. The jungle around them went completely silent. Not quiet, silent, as if someone had pressed a mute button on the world. And then, from somewhere deep beneath the earth, they heard a sound. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a rumble, it was something closer to a sigh, a long, slow exhale that seemed to rise from the very soil beneath them. The ground shuddered slightly, and Marcus watched in frozen horror as the surface of the clearing rippled like the skin of a pond disturbed by a stone. "Run," Daniel breathed. They ran, but the jungle didn't want them to leave. Vines that hadn't been there before seemed to appear in their path. Roots reached up from the soil and wrapped around their ankles. Victor tripped first, slamming face first into the dirt and screaming as something, he never saw what, wrapped around his leg and began dragging him backward toward the clearing. Reina grabbed his arms. Marcus and Daniel grabbed her. Together they pulled with everything they had, their muscles screaming, their lungs burning. But whatever had Victor was stronger. It pulled him inch by inch back toward the center of the clearing, and no matter how hard they thought, they couldn't stop it. Then Victor screamed a scream that Marcus would hear in his nightmares for the rest of his life. It wasn't a scream of pain. It was a scream of realization, a scream of seeing something so terrible, so incomprehensible, that the mind simply breaks trying to process it. And then Victor was gone. Not pulled underground, not dragged into the dirt, just gone. One moment he was there, and the next he wasn't. His hand slipped from Reina's grip, and he vanished as if he had never existed at all. No blood, no sound, no body, just empty air where a man had been half a second before. Reina didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, staring at her empty hands, her mouth hanging open in silent shock. "We have to go," Marcus said. "Now." They ran again. This time they didn't stop. They ran for hours, crashing through the jungle in blind terror, not caring about direction, not caring about injuries. Branches tore at their skin, thorns ripped their clothes, but they kept running because behind them, always behind them, they could hear something following. It wasn't footsteps, it was that breathing again, that slow, rhythmic exhale rising from the earth itself, as if the jungle floor was one giant living thing and they were insects crawling across its skin. By nightfall, they collapsed from exhaustion. They had no idea where they were. Their GPS was dead, their phones had no signal. The only thing they had left was each other, and even that was falling apart. Reina hadn't spoken a single word since Victor disappeared. She sat with her back against a tree, staring into the darkness with hollow eyes. Daniel was trembling, muttering prayers under his breath. Marcus tried to stay calm, tried to be the leader, but every few minutes he caught himself looking at the ground beneath his feet, terrified that it might start moving again. That night, they heard voices. At first, Marcus thought it was rescue. He sat up, straining to listen, hope flooding his chest. But the voices weren't speaking English. They weren't speaking Spanish either. They were speaking something else, something old, something guttural,
something that made his skin crawl. And then, from the darkness between the trees, he saw eyes. Not animal eyes, not human eyes, something in between, too large, too bright, reflecting the faint moonlight like glass orbs filled with fire. The eyes watched them for hours. They never blinked, they never moved, and when Marcus finally gathered the courage to shine his flashlight at them, the beam revealed nothing, just empty jungle, just shadows. But the eyes were still there. He could feel them. By the third night, Reina was gone.
They hadn't seen her leave. They hadn't heard anything. One moment she was sleeping beside them, and the next she simply wasn't there. Her backpack was still on the ground, her shoes were still beside it, but Reina herself had vanished, just like Victor, as if the jungle had simply swallowed her whole. Daniel broke down completely after that. He dropped to his knees and screamed at the trees, demanding answers, demanding to know what was happening, demanding to speak to whatever force was hunting them. Marcus tried to calm him, but it was no use. Daniel had crossed over into some kind of hysteria from which there was no return. That was when they heard the voice. It came from everywhere and nowhere at once. A low, resonant whisper that seemed to rise from the soil and the air and the trees simultaneously. It spoke in a language Marcus didn't recognize, but somehow, impossibly, he understood every word. "You were warned," the voice said. "You did not listen. Now you belong to the mouth." Marcus grabbed Daniel and ran. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't care. He just knew that he had to move, had to keep moving, had to find a way out of this nightmare before it consumed them both. They ran for 2 more days. They ate nothing. They drank rainwater from leaves. They didn't sleep. Every time Marcus closed his eyes, he saw those burning eyes watching him from the dark. Every time he stepped on soft ground, he felt that terrible breathing beneath his feet. On the 11th day, a search and rescue helicopter spotted them near the edge of the jungle. By that time, Marcus was barely conscious. Daniel was catatonic, his eyes wide and empty, his body rigid with shock. When the rescuers pulled them into the helicopter, Marcus tried to explain what had happened. He tried to tell them about the clearing, about the breathing ground, about Victor and Reina, but the rescuers just exchanged worried glances and told him to rest. Later, when Marcus was stable enough to speak to investigators, he told the whole story again. This time, the investigators listened. One of them, an older man with gray hair and tired eyes, nodded slowly when Marcus finished. "You went to the mouth," the man said quietly. Marcus stared at him. "You know about it?" The investigator didn't answer. He just closed his notebook, stood up, and left the room. The report was sealed the next day. Marcus was told never to return to Peru. He was told never to speak publicly about what happened. He obeyed for 8 months. Then he found a journalist willing to listen. Marcus Whitmore now lives in a small apartment in Toledo, Ohio. He doesn't go outside much anymore. He doesn't like the feeling of earth beneath his feet. He has the floors of his apartment covered in concrete and tile, nothing soft, nothing that could move. At night, he still hears the breathing. He says it followed him home. He says the mouth is patient. He says it's waiting. Daniel Whitmore was committed to a psychiatric facility in 2020. He has never spoken again. Nurses report that he sometimes draws the same image over and over, a perfect circle surrounded by trees, with something rising from the center, something with eyes. The bodies of Victor Salinas and Reina Orozco were never recovered. Their families received no closure. The Peruvian government officially listed them as lost to natural causes. But the Ashaninka people know the truth. They always have. If you ever find yourself in the Peruvian Amazon and a guide warns you not to enter a certain place, listen to them. Some places on this earth are not meant for human eyes. Some places
are alive, and some places are hungry.